Hello everyone, welcome back to Classics Bin. Today we have another entry in A.E. Burns' Council of Nicaea. I believe this is part 12. Today we continue on with the story of Cyril of Jerusalem and the theories about the composition of the Nicene and Constantinopolitan creeds. One of the key pieces of evidence that Burns brings forward, and I believe he also takes this from a scholar of his time, one of the ways that we know about the composition and the timeline is because of how certain bishops and members of synods and councils remembered Cyril and how his creed was related to the ordination of Nectarius, who was a neophyte who became a bishop. What an interesting thing just to say off the bat. But anyway, that should give you a pretty good summary of what happens here. We go through some other councils very quickly. I think Chalcedon and Ephesus. That's where I'll leave it for now. So thanks for tuning in. I'll get it started. When Meletius was still a semi-Arian, a bishop had been consecrated to minister to the Orthodox faithful in Antioch, Paulinus by name, with whom Athanasius had communicated, and his claim was strongly supported by Pope Damasus of Rome. Gregory pleaded with the council to accept his claim, and thus heal the schism and conciliate the Westerns. He pointed out that Paulinus was an old man, and not likely to live long. If it costs something, let us make the sacrifice for the sake of a great religious gain. But the younger bishops, whom Gregory sarcastically compares to crows and geese and cranes in a quarrel, to a whirlwind raising a cloud of dust, to a swarm of wasps darting against a traveler's face, insisted that to accept Paulinus would give a triumph to the West, whereas the East, where Christ appeared, had the right to ascendancy. Gregory retorted that the East was the land where Christ was crucified. In the end, Flavian was elected, and a personal attack on Gregory brought about his resignation. His successor, Nectarius, praetor of the city, was going to visit his birthplace Tarsus, and called on Diodor, bishop of Tarsus, to see if he could carry any letters for him. Diodor, impressed by his reverend appearance, put his name on the list of candidates for the office, which was submitted to the Emperor Theodosius. Theodosius singled him out, and despite some protests, he was elected. But he was only a catechumen, and had to be baptized before he could be consecrated. Who would be more likely to come to the front at this moment than Cyril, the most famous catechist of the day? This most ingenious conjecture of Kunze, that the revived Jerusalem Creed was used as his baptismal confession and became the creed of the Church in Constantinople, is supported by evidence from the Acts of the Council of Chalcedon, at which N and C were quoted side by side. At the end of that council, after subscribing to its decrees, Callinicus, bishop of Apamea, which is Myrleia in Bithynia, accepting the creeds or the symbols of the 318 and 150 fathers, referred in a note to the Council of Constantinople as having been held at the ordination of the most pious Nectarius the bishop. Obviously, there was some connection in his mind between the creed and the consecration of Nectarius, who, as we know, came to it in the white robe of a neophyte. The next task of the Council of Constantinople was to confirm the Nicene faith. We know that they did not compose a creed as a rival to N. The synodical letter of the council, which met the following year, refers to the faith of Nicaea, which ought to be sufficient for you, for us, for all who wrest not the word of the true faith, for it is the ancient faith, it is the faith of our baptism, it is the faith that teaches us to believe in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. They go on to refer to the ordination of Nectarius and the election of Flavian, and then they say, of the Church at Jerusalem, mother of all the churches, we make known that the Right Reverend and most religious Cyril is bishop, who was some time ago canonically ordained by the bishops of the province, and has in several places fought a good fight against the Arians. This mention of Cyril is significant in this context, if we may assume that it was his creed from the Mother Church of Jerusalem which was taught to Nectarius. No doubt, as they say here, the faith of Nicaea was reaffirmed against all Arian creeds, but it was put forth as an instruction for bishops, not as a baptismal creed, for which it was apparently never used. And the Jerusalem Creed, with its Nicene insertions and its added phrases, so useful against Apollinarian and Macedonian errors, though couched, so to speak, in a baptismal form, could be accepted side by side with it as an improved recension. The Council of AD 381 passed 4 canons, of which the first decreed that the faith of the 318 fathers, N, should remain supreme. But they also sent a letter to the emperor, reporting on their work, in which they say, then they also proclaimed shortened decrees, both ratifying the faith of the fathers, who met at Nicaea, and anathematizing the heresies that had sprung up after it. This is an accurate description of the first canon, but the words about the faith of Nicaea remaining supreme might fairly be said to include a reference to the other creed, accepted at the ordination of Nectarius, especially if they thought of it as the creed of the Mother Church of Jerusalem. Now we know that Theodosius in AD 383 had certain creeds brought to him and accepted the creed of Nectarius, which contained the homoousios. Then, a curtain of silence falls over the scene. At Ephesus in AD 431, no other symbol than N was thought of. In AD 448, a synod was held by Flavian against Eutyches, at which N, the decrees of Ephesus, and Cyril of Alexandria were quoted as authorities. At the robber synod of Ephesus, in AD 449, Diogenes of Cyzicus, who soon afterwards meets us as a witness to see, in his vote upheld N. At the first session of the Council of Chalcedon, in AD 451, the Acts of the Synod of 449 were read. When the reader came to the recitation of the faith of Eutyches, in which he proclaimed his belief in the Nicene faith, and reminded the Synod of the definition of the Council of AD 431, which prohibited additions to, or diminutions from, that faith, Diogenes cried out, "Eutyches addressed the Synod falsely. It received an addition from the Holy Fathers, because of the perversities of Apollinarius and Valentinius, and Macedonius, and men like them. And there have been added to the symbol of the Fathers the words, who came down and was incarnate of the Holy Ghost, and of the Virgin Mary. This Eutyches passed over, for he is an Apollinarian. Even Apollinarius received the Nicene Synod, understanding the letter of the creed in accordance with his own perversity. The Holy Fathers at Nicaea had only the words, he was incarnate, but those that followed explained it by saying, of the Holy Ghost and the Virgin Mary. The Egyptian bishops at once contradicted him. No one admits of addition. No one admits of diminution. Let the decree of Nicaea stand good. There was great excitement throughout the long session. When it grew dark, wax candles were lit. At length, the reading ceased, and the imperial commissioners urged that each bishop should, without delay, expound his own faith in writing, knowing that the emperor accepted the exposition of the 318 fathers who had met at Nicaea and the exposition of the 150 who had met at a later time.